Straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily. Were rioters who stormed the Capitol building trained and organized?
Seemingly with the intent to capture the Vice President of the United States.
Our interview with the attorney for one of the suspects accused of leaving a threatening message. Plus, the daring lengths one photographer went to capture incredible images. Why he's now facing even more charges for them. And a deadly police encounter captured on camera. A family calls for justice after a black man was killed in front of his own home. Law&Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law&Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmire along with Terri Austin. Federal authorities are trying to keep suspects in the storming of the U.S. Capitol building locked behind bars. Angenette and Levy has more on what we've learned about the deadly insurrection.
Yeah, Brian, we have some new information that prosecutors are outlining in a brief. They are allegations against Jacob Chansley, who's also known as the QAnon shaman. The government has filed an 18-page brief that lays out why they believe Chansley should remain in jail. Federal prosecutors say Chansley is an active participant in and has made himself the most prominent symbol of a violent insurrection that attempted to overthrow the United States government. It goes on to say that Chansley has expressed interest in returning to D.C. for President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. Photos in the brief showed Chansley with a bullhorn, and prosecutors say Chansley actually left a note for Vice President Pence saying, quote, "It's only a matter of time. Justice is coming." Now, joining me now is Alfred Watkins. He is the attorney for Jacob Chansley, one of the attorneys. Mr. Watkins, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
So you've been quoted as saying that you believe President Trump should issue a pardon to your client. Why do you believe that's necessary or should happen?
So I don't think anybody in a million years, myself included, are holding their breath to believe that at some point along the line, President Trump will say, you know what, I want to pardon the guy with horns and a fur wrap. The fact of the matter is the purpose of this exercise with seeking the pardon from President Trump was, in effect, dealing with and addressing a long-standing relationship that my client had with the president in my client's mind. And for him to get past the reality of the perceived betrayal by the president of our client, his simple thought process was, give the president a chance to do the honorable thing. So when we reach out to the president and say, through the White House not press secretary, but chief of staff, Mark Meadows, hey, look, we'd like a pardon. I'm not sitting here holding my breath. I've told my client not to hold my breath. But what this does is it permits my client to come to the stark reality that while he may have been duped by the president, while he may have believed that he was doing what the president invited him to do, the president isn't on his side. The nation is not on his side. And he's going to have to stand up or belly up to the bar and ultimately hold himself accountable for what his role is. The dialogue that we've been trying to start here is to keep this from being a lynch mob mentality.
Mr. Watkins, I want to play a clip of President Trump from January 6th, and then we're going to talk about it on the other side.
We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
Mr. Watkins, in listening to that clip, and there were some other clips from that day, the president never instructed your client to go down there and walk into the Capitol. In fact, the president actually said at one point he wanted people to be peaceful and for their voices to be heard. So where is the connection here? The president never told your client to make those choices. He made those choices.
All right, so you listen to the words that the president said. I listen to the words that the president said, and we hear perhaps the same words, but you have to contextualize them within the heart and mind of those who listened to and acted on those words. We're talking about not just the guy with the horns and the hair. the tattoos, the bare chest, the shaman. We're talking about thousands of people who they felt, they heard the message to them from their president was, we're going to walk down to the Capitol. No, the president didn't say, hey, look, we're going to walk down to the Capitol and we're going to play tiddlywinks, or we're going to go into the Capitol ourselves and we're going to get this done. Hyperbole is used, innuendo is used, but it doesn't matter. My client acted in a fashion which was against the law, but he did so within the context of this dynamic.
But your client made that choice. What was his intention in entering the Capitol?
Have you ever been to a high school game where right before the game, the coach has the team in the locker room and he's hyping them up to race out in the field? That's what was done. Our president is a very excellent motivator for those who are receiving his message. He succeeded in no small part because he talked to and identified people whose voice had not been heard for way too long.
But your client also called this a win because the traitors were in their offices hunkering down with gas masks on. Does your client actually believe these people are traitors? He also called Vice President Pence. He told the FBI he was a child trafficking traitor, which we've never seen any evidence of. Does your client actually believe these things?
Well, I don't think we've seen any evidence of voter fraud. I don't think we've seen any evidence of, a child porn ring. There is an alternate universe that happens to exist in this world. And sometimes some people embrace it and they move forward with it. And they have an issue. My client happens to, it doesn't take much to look at my client and say, you know what? Maybe, just maybe, he doesn't fall within the bell curve of that which you and I would consider normal.
And the FBI has said there was a plot to assassinate. The feds are now walking back that claim. What's your response to that?
So who's walking back what claim? There's a lot of activity that's going on. So help me out. What specifically? Yeah.
The FBI is walking back the claim, or at least the U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia is walking back the claim that people were trying to assassinate members of Congress in the Capitol building. That's been some news that's been breaking just here in the last couple hours. So what's your response to that?
Yeah, well, here's part of the issue, and I'm really respectful of the assistant U.S. attorney that's involved in this. The fact is he's having to deal with a lot of moving targets, in addition to media inquiries and, of course, the political ramifications that are going on. He has to deal with special agents, investigative officers and agents, and the reports that are coming in with them. And so is he walking it back out? He's doing the responsible thing because he knows that his duty is justice.
Mr. Watkins, we're going to have to cut it off there. We thank you so much for joining us, and we will continue to follow this case. Brian, we'll send it back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angenette and Mr. Watkins. But don't go anywhere, because still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, our experts are standing by to react to what attorney Al Watkins just said. Plus, the brave actions of a Capitol police officer, how Congress is looking to honor his action after the break. Take a look at these faces. The New York Times was reporting the FBI is now investigating 37 people for the death of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, including some of the suspects shown here. And ahead of the presidential inauguration, investigators are monitoring possible threats in online chat rooms.
We have a daily download with the FBI. We brief the mayor daily just on the information that's out there. And I can assure the residents of the District of Columbia that the Metropolitan Police Department and our federal partners are in a posture to respond to the information that's out there thus far that we've heard.
One officer's actions are standing out from the January 6 riots. Terri Austin has the latest on a plan to honor him for his bravery.
Brian, a bipartisan group of lawmakers want to recognize a Capitol police officer with a gold medal for his quick thinking that likely saved lives. Officials say Officer Eugene Goodman tricked a group of rioters who had broken into the building. Goodman, seeing the door to the Senate chamber was opened, pushed one of the rioters, getting the mob to follow him up another flight of stairs. The group was led to a hallway where more officers were waiting as a backup.
Joining us now is retired NYPD detective turned professor Kirk Burkhalter, along with Terri Austin. Terri, you've got a question for the professor.
Yes, Kirk, I wanted to know, it appears that this might be one thing that gets bipartisan support. What are your thoughts on the move to honor Officer Goodman?
Oh, I think it's an excellent move. The officer here showed an amazing level of situational awareness and more than likely prevented further harm or even loss of life. The FBI latest reports notwithstanding, we certainly know that folks did intend in some way, shape, or form to at least take hostages as evidenced by the zip ties and other materials they had. So he did a tremendous job, thought on his feet. It's an honor that would be well-deserved.
I would agree with you there, Professor Burkhalter. Now, Terri, I got a question for you. 37 suspects in the killing of a single officer. How's prosecuting that case going to look?
You know, Brian, it's not going to be easy. I suspect there are going to be a multitude of motions to join the cases by the prosecuting attorneys and motions to sever the cases by the defense attorneys. The prosecutors are going to argue that the cases involve the same set of facts and circumstances and that they will be able to save resources. But, you know, the defense attorneys are definitely going to argue that combining these cases will prejudice their individual clients. So I think we're going to see a bevy of motions prior to trial.
All right, let's talk about what defense attorney Al Watkins just spoke about. Professor Burkhalter, we heard him describe his client as like maybe not being what we would describe as normal, and that in his mind, when we contextualize this all, that he believed the officer was inviting him into the Capitol to fight for the election. Could that be a possible defense here in his case?
I actually don't see how. You know, if you think about the impeachment proceedings, they were based on the fact that Congress argued that the president's rhetoric was reckless. And here, in some way, shape, or form, the defendant's attorney is stating that he was invited in. And it sounds kind of good in an academic setting, but I don't think it will fly in a court setting. And I, don't know if he was setting up a little bit of an insanity defense here. And that might be a possibility.
All right, so maybe this would work on one of Professor Burkhalter's law school exams, but maybe not in the courtrooms. I'll see how that works out.
Exactly.
And Terri, there's a potential for felony murder charges here for these 37 people, right?
Absolutely. You know, we had a Capitol Police officer who was killed. Any one of these individuals who was involved in breaking in and anywhere near that police officer could be charged with murder if, in fact, they contributed to his death.
All right, so we've got 37 suspects. We've got the QAnon shaman getting his organic meals. We're going to keep an eye on this case as it develops. Thank you both for contributing. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, why the Attorney General of New York is suing police over protest. But first, an update in the case of a photographer arrested for taking these daring photos. What new charges he's facing after the break. An Army veteran who's been traveling the country taking extreme risks to take photos now faces more charges. Angenette Levy has an update on the Law and Crime exclusive.
Yeah, Brian, we first told you about Isaac Wright, also known on the internet as Drifter Shoots, earlier this month. He was charged with breaking into an office building in Cincinnati, but now he's also charged with breaking into a Major League Baseball ballpark.
Wright's photos posted on social media and on his website where he sells them. He was honorably discharged from the Army in April of last year and started scaling towers, buildings, and bridges to take photos. A grand jury in Cincinnati has now indicted Wright on 2 counts of burglary, 1 count of possession of criminal tools, and inducing panic. Prosecutors say Wright broke into the Great American Ballpark where the Cincinnati Reds play last November, and that he used a lockpick, set, and pry bar to break into an office building nearby, leading to an 8-hour lockdown of that building and search. But Wright maintains he didn't break into anything, and his supporters have posted on his Instagram account asking them to call the prosecutor's office to protest the charging decision.
Obviously, they aren't privy to all of the evidence that we have, nor even some of the statements that have been made by Mr. Wright. So I understand there's always sentiment for defendants and victims alike on any criminal case. So that's just their perspective. But we reviewed all of the evidence available, and there was evidence to support the charges. Burglary is really a trespass with a purpose to commit an offense inside the facility or home if it is a home. In this case, we didn't charge a home, just entering with purpose to commit some criminal offense. In this instance, it's criminal trespass. And so it fits the statute, and so that's why it's charged as a burglary.
Wright's lawyer, Lawrence Haas, issued a statement to us. It reads, commenting on any specifics without reviewing state's evidence would not make sense at this point in the case. We do see a lot of similarities between the allegations against Isaac and the protest in 2014 at P&G done by Greenpeace International. Luckily, we have the case precedent in that matter to hold all parties to a consistent resolution. Now, those protesters in that case, they actually ended up being charged with burglary, but pleaded guilty to a trespassing charge. Isaac Wright is also facing a felony trespassing charge in Detroit, Michigan. He is accused of climbing a bridge and taking photos there. Brian?
Thanks, Angenette. When we come back, a deadly police shooting in Texas. The video that captures a man answering his door, then later being shot by an officer. Why his family is calling for the officer's arrest, next. Welcome back. New York's Attorney General is suing New York City and its police department for what she calls excessive force and false arrests during Black Lives Matter protest.
We found that over the course of the protest from May to December of 2020, NYPD officers engaged in blatant use of excessive force and often misconduct, including the indiscriminate, unjustified, and repeated use of batons, pepper spray, bicycles, and a crowd-controlled tactic known as kettling, also referred to as containment, which caused significant physical harm.
I want to tell you about another incident, the type that happens far too often and what many protesters are fighting for. Killen, Texas police officer Reynaldo Contreras responded to a call for psychiatric help on January 10th. 52-year-old Patrick Warren Sr. answered the door. Police say Warren was emotionally distressed. The officer deployed his taser, but it reportedly was ineffective. That's when police say officer fired, killing Warren. Attorney Lee Merritt is representing Warren's family and released video of the incident captured on the family's Ring doorbell and cell phone. A warning to some viewers, this may be disturbing.
Hey, Dad, sit down. Sit down. Sit down. Sit down, please. No, I told you don't use a gun. I told you don't use a gun.
Back with me are the professor and Terry. Kirk, you've got the experience of an NYPD officer and the knowledge of a professor. How do you view this police shooting?
Well, it evidences once again that we don't have a national standard on how we treat those who are under mental distress. And it needs to be corrected. This tends to happen to African Americans more than others. And further, in this instance, I believe, there wasn't a resource officer available or something in that respect. This has to be a priority across our country. How many videos must we see of unarmed people in mental distress being the victims of deadly physical force at the hands of law enforcement? Something must absolutely change.
Absolutely. Terri, once again, it's a person of color. Once again, it's an emotionally distressed person. Once again, officers are not prepared to interact with a person, and now a man is dead. What are your thoughts when you first heard this story?
Brian, when I first heard this, my reaction was just like the family's reaction. I said, no, 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 this can't be possibly happening again. But it is, and it won't be the last time. I mean, according to the Washington Post, 989 people were shot and killed by police in 2020, and blacks were killed at a rate of twice the amount, and many of them were unarmed. And until we get some training here, we will continue to see this until police officers understand that just because you are a person of color, it doesn't mean that you are a threat. And yes, they should have had someone who was trained as far as responding to someone with mental illness. We knew that this individual had mental illness, and so this should not have happened.
Now, Kirk, you touched on this a little bit, but according to the story, the day before, they called for a resource officer. That resource officer showed up, brought him to the hospital, and it all worked. So why did it fail here? Why can't we get it right?
Well, it failed here because the administration, the power structure there in that particular municipality has not taken this as a priority. It must be a priority. When you send a police officer who is not trained to a situation like this is something that's likely to happen.
Thanks, Kirk. Thanks, Terri. And thank you for joining us here. We'll see you next time we discuss justice in America.